During the 1900s to 1920, many books that were written shaped America. Ida Tyrrell wrote The History of Standard Oil, in which she wrote her expose of the monopolistic practices of John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company as a serialized work in McClure's magazine before the appearance of the first book edition in 1904. The breakup of Standard Oil in 1911 into 34 baby standards can be attributed in large part to Tarbell's masterly investigative reporting. Another example of investigative journalism is The Jungle, written by Upton Sinclair. This graphic expose of the Chicago meatpacking industry, presented as a novel, was one of the first works of fiction to lead directly to national legislation. The Federal Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 established the agency that eventually became the Food and Drug Administration in 1930. Margaret Sanger published Family Limitation in 1914, in which she simply explained how to prevent pregnancy. While working as a nurse in the New York slums, she witnessed the plight of a poor woman suffering from frequent pregnancies and abortions. She believed that these women had the right to control their reproductive health. The Ashcan School was an artistic movement in the United States during the early 1900s. It is best known for works portraying scenes of daily life in New York, often in the city's poorer neighborhoods. Paintings like Sixth Avenue by John Sloan reflected this new style of painting, in which a poor woman is crossing a street in a state of confusion. The Ashcan School formed out of an urge to rebel against the dogmatic criteria of popular painting of the time, namely American Impressionism and academic realism. In 1901, Carrie Jacobs Bond publishes I Love You Truly, which becomes the first song composed by an American woman.
The Progressive Era pushed for a change in public attitudes at the turn of the century, with new amusement parks, dance clubs, and glittering movie palaces, as well as mass circulation magazines such as McClure's and Cosmopolitan. The industries of entertainment and consumption both grew dramatically, causing a greater variety in leisure activities. This time of growing accessibility saw the beginning of processed foods as early as the 1910s. Such foods included Nathan's hot dogs, Aunt Jemima syrup, mayonnaise, Oreo cookies, and marshmallow fluff. A major movement of this era was led by the Anti-Saloon League that pushed for the prohibition of alcohol. With German Americans prominent in the brewing and distillery industries, American participation in the First World War added allegedly patriotic motives to calls for a constitutional amendment on prohibition. And on December of 1917, Congress adopted the 18th Amendment banning the sale, manufacture, and transportation of alcohol nationwide. The new century was a time of simplicity and common sense, and though details were still very elaborate, the trend of simplicity was intensified and sped up by the Great War, which clearly established two principles in women's dress: freedom and convenience. For the rich and fashionable, that meant styling only the latest from Paris, and common modes of style included the corset, high necklines, and of course, garish hats that were meant to display wealth and opulence.
Einstein proposed a special theory of relativity that, at the time, many could not understand or believe. However, a major breakthrough caused those who finally understood Mr. Einstein to finally believe him after he proved his theory through inference. In other words, he proved that E equals mc squared only came from relativity on January 1st, 1905. X-rays were initially discovered in 1896. However, in 1912, that's when business was really booming. High X-ray vacuums were created so that it could finally be put into industrial use. This new X-ray helped give extremely detailed insight on how crystals were structured. On September 11, 1911, scientist Ernest Rutherford gave insight on the atomic nucleus by establishing that it was very dense, minuscule, and as well as positively charged. In addition to that, he made the influential assumption of the electron location, the outside of the atom. On October 14, 1914, Garrett Morgan patented the gas mask, which was widely used as a prototype for all the different gas mask creations during World War I. He earned first prize at the Second International Exposition of Safety and Sanitation for his blueprint of the unofficial gas mask. Of course, there were many obstacles that made the creations of the military airplane difficult, such as a fatal propeller failure in 1908, But finally, on July 30th, 1909, the first military airplane was created. It flew at the amazing average speed of 42 miles per hour, not to mention, it flew 10 miles with a passenger.
The 1900s were entered with McKinley serving as president. However, he was shot on September 6, 1901 and died 8 days later. His vice president, Theodore Roosevelt, then became president. The U.S. then passed from an era of internal growth and expansion to one of growing participation in world affairs. Roosevelt also signed the Food and Drug Act of 1906, which led to the creation of the FDA. William Howard Taft became the 27th president after the election of 1908. Taft is remembered more for getting stuck in the tub because of his rather larger size than for what he actually accomplished. An accomplishment was the ratification of the 16th Amendment, which mandated a federal income tax. He also supported the 17th Amendment, which allowed for the direct election of U.S. senators by popular vote. However, the 17th Amendment wasn't ratified until Woodrow Wilson became the 28th president in 1913. President Wilson at first decided for the U.S. to remain neutral in World War I, so it minded its own business and kept trade with everyone. However, unrestricted submarine warfare introduced by the Germans led Wilson to ask Congress to declare war on Germany. Soon America entered World War I, joining the Allies, which included Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. However, the Soviet Union left to resolve its own matters around the time the U.S. entered. The U.S. entering World War I in 1917 with new energies and the Germans' weak led to the Allies' victory. World War I was ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles on June 28, 1919. The treaty was negotiated mostly among the Allies. The Germans had little to no participation in it. The U.S. Senate, however, refused to ratify it, and the U.S. government took no responsibilities to most of its provisions. Yet Wilson came out in triumph as his 14 points, a program he proposed for world peace, served as a backbone to the treaty. He also made sure to include the creation of modern Poland, the pledge of support of disarmament, and the creation of the League of Nations within the treaty. On August 28, 1920, the goal long sought by the women's suffrage was reached. After much protest, women within the entire nation were granted the right to vote, as President Wilson ratified the 19th Amendment. Now all white male and female citizens were allowed to vote. This milestone didn't come easy as it required a lengthy and difficult struggle, but on November 2nd of that same year, more than 8 million women were able to vote for the very first time.
Shopping led to industries and entertainment to grow largely in the 1900s. Goods and pleasures were made to sell themselves by their brands and slogans. Production shifted to mass-marketed goods and household consumers. By the 1920s, people lived a much more commercial and organized life. In 1907, a banking panic erupted when New York Knickerbocker Bank failed. Depositors rushed to withdraw their savings and count money, which led to the collapse of 246 other United States banks. This panic took place in October and early November 1907. It was triggered by a failed speculation that caused the bankruptcy of two brokerage firms. The Reserve Federal Act in 1913 was created to avert further financial panics. The assembly line was developed by Henry Ford in 1913. It sparked mass production not only in automobiles but also other production platforms. It made Ford Model T cars affordable and introduced high wages for Ford workers. The creation of the assembly line led to the Clayton Antitrust Act, which required and enforced specific conduct for large corporations.